Hello, Breach Burke here for the Catonia podcast live stream that I'm doing at 3 o'clock. Now, I started to do this at 12 o'clock, and apologies to those of you who were on at 12. Might have only been Eupoliti. It might have only been one person who had gotten on before I had to get off again because the power went out in my house, which meant that the internet went out, and so I had to completely drop the live stream quite early because it's quite windy here today. The wind gusts, I don't know what the actual total is on the wind gusts. I want to say that it's been about maybe 40 to 50 mile an hour winds, possibly more. It's been enough that I've had certain things in my yard. Actually, I have a whole fence piece in the back of my yard that has completely blown over. And it's been actually quite an adventurous day elemental-wise. I've had I had a flood in my kitchen this morning because there was certain things that went on with the bathtub that water, when I was showering, I realized, hey, you have to have the curtain on the inside, and it was sort of on the edge there. But anyway, water had gone over and had literally gone through into my kitchen floor because I didn't have everything kind of sealed off. So not only did I have to clean all that up, but I had to go out and I went and actually finally I had the waterproofing caulk that I had in my thing. I was like, okay, we're just going to fix this right now. So the guy who had actually put my floors in, oh God, it's been a few years. Probably it was 2019 actually. It's been about 5 years. This is the first time that I've had an incident with that, but I do know what caused it. And fortunately, it wasn't a big deal, just some stuff to dry up. So I dealt with this kind of flood this morning, and then I had to go. I have this fence that's about 6 foot high fence that is around my property, and I've been actually meaning to take it down all the way in the back because I would rather have the woods open and just have fence on the side of my neighbors. And one piece has just fallen down, and I was like, "Oh, that's actually quite fortunate because the elemental gods have now given me. Now I can just pick up that piece, and I have some pieces that are broken on the other side. I said, right, I can pull those out. I can replace it with that, and then I can pull down the rest of it. Like the job has already been started. So yeah, that's sort of damage, but it's actually quite fortuitous. And then as soon as I was about to start this live stream, actually about 11, I had the internet go in and out, and then the power just completely went out. Not for a very long period of time, but it took till about 12:20ish for it to come back. So I thought, you know what, let me just take a break, and then I'll come back at 3. And so we've got a few more people joining me today, so thank you for joining me. It might be actually a better time for some people, but normally 3 o'clock is not. By 3 o'clock, I'm sort of winding down. But today, you just go with the flow. Things are different. So, so anyway, that's sort of my introduction to my rather bizarre day today. But everything's good. So the other thing I wanted to talk about briefly, the topic for today, I think I had mentioned, was toxic masculinity and toxic femininity, and how they're actually the same thing. And I'm connecting this to the idea of Eris, goddess of chaos, and a couple of mythologies connected to that. And another thing that I'm bringing into the mix, as I recall from what I had said a couple hours ago, was the SOTU response by Katie Britt. Now, those of you who live in other countries other than the United States, SOTU, S-O-T-U, is a acronym. It's a shorthand for State of the Union. And this is a speech that the President of the United States gives. I don't know why I associate the SOTU with January, but I guess it's usually something that's done sort of 90 days in to the, like if a president is first elected, the first 90 days, then they give a State of the Union after 90 days. So I guess this is sort of makes sense that it's happening around then, but I don't know, somehow in my memory I feel like it happens earlier than this, but anyway, it happened last Thursday. And so Joe Biden gave his speech, and he had a really incredible response to his speech because it was fiery, which sort of contradicted the narrative to such an extent that he was, because I think a lot of people who are opponents of him or who are skeptical say, oh, he's old, he's sleepy, he's this and that. I see this a lot in the British press as well, that there's sort of this impression of him as being very sleepy. And so, I mean, really, I feel like the energy he put into this speech was an effort to contradict that narrative of him as being sleepy. And really, honestly, I mean, this is just kind of a preliminary remark, but the fact that somebody's in their 80s does not necessarily mean that they are past, they may be past what we would think of as their peak, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're incapable of something. They're not, or demented or anything else. It's not, to me, that's not necessarily a factor. There's certain things that you can point to. I mean, yeah, he forgets a name here and there and messes things up. And people tend to forget that both people running in the U.S. right now are not exactly spring chickens, I guess is the word. So it's not that we're dealing with one young person and one older person, okay? And I feel that one of those two people certainly has more alarming signs that they demonstrate of mental incapacity. But anyway, I'm kind of going to bring this because the State of the Union is given by the president, and then somebody from the opposing party will give a response. Okay, so it's called the SOTU response. And this year they picked a senator from Alabama, probably not by accident that it was Alabama, called Katie Britt. And she gave a performance in terms of the response to the State of the Union that was interesting. So, well, from my perspective, this particular live stream that I'm doing and my discussion of this topic, I'm not looking to get into politics. I mean, my politics, I've always have more liberal politics. I'm not a conservative. I never have been. Although there have been times when, I've understood conservatism to the point that, yes, you need a response every now and again to where, we've got to jump in and spend a lot of money and save everything. It's good to have a conservative response that says, well, no, wait, maybe now we need to, back off and not spend so much and, not think maybe the government doesn't need to be so involved in this. Like, to me, that's not a inherently irrational response, okay? But that said, I do feel that, what we're dealing with now in terms of the Republican Party in the United States is not what I would term conservative. It's actually autocratic or, even authoritarian. And there are huge issues with that. So, and someone said, someone said only a 4-year difference. Yeah, it's interesting. This seems to be something. When I think about it, I started voting in the 1990s, and actually in 1990, that's when I turned 18. And I'm remembering even things that came before this, like the Reagan years and things like that, and the kind of changes that have come in. And it's been quite remarkable, and things have actually moved quite quickly in terms of that. So in any case, what I'm interested in terms of Katie Britt's SOTU response is the way in how her portrayal of the feminine, okay? Because remember, Katonia podcast deals in the dark feminine. So I'm interested in the kind of feminine narrative that was put forward in that particular speech. So that's the thing that I'm really focused on here. So we're going to get to that. And I do have a couple of mythologies that I want to bring in because, even though I have students who will tell me, well, they don't. Some of them have told me, but there's definitely this perception that Greek mythology is the old beliefs. That's the beliefs of people who, lived a long time ago and has nothing to do with today. It's just, the way people who didn't have science and didn't have other things, or if you happen to be somebody who is a champion of monotheism, before they had the progressive enlightenment of Christianity or whatever, or Islam or Judaism, whatever it is. There's this impression that, and actually, truthfully, I feel, obviously, people know that my views go back quite a bit before the Greeks as well. Although I do talk quite a lot about them, that is what my doctoral work is on, that is what I know. So, I do want to talk a little bit about how mythology figures into the current narrative, and particularly the narratives that we're talking about around toxic femininity and toxic masculinity. Before I get into this, I just want to very briefly, for like 2 minutes or less, just kind of mention what's going on with the Catonia podcast. Somebody asked me if I'm making another book. I do have, yes, I do actually have a few other books coming out this year. I have some fiction works that are coming out, and also Phantom Queen by Theon Publishing should be coming out later in the year as far as nonfiction goes, and I'm hoping to do a couple of other academic papers and works this year that I'm hoping to have more information on that soon. So yes, just mention that is something that's coming out. It's a question in the live stream here. So there will be more, and as I have more information on that, it'll be posted here. And also on my Patreon, and also on Facebook. So in whatever place you follow me, you'll see the updates there. So the other updates that I had done an interview with something called Mystic Mag. Now the thing about Mystic Mag is that they are, I looked them up, and they're sort of they'd reached out to me and they said, can we interview you? And what they were interviewing me about was my coaching practice and my mentoring practice. Because I use a lot of tools in my mentoring practice. I use astrology, I use tarot, I use different things. So I think that's what sort of drew them to me. They did ask a lot of intelligent questions, actually. So I was happy to do the interview for them, and they did it really quick and then put it up. So I had posted that earlier this week. You can check out my IG profile earlier I have a link to that in there. And then also on transition.life.coaching, which is my other page for my, again, that's my one-to-one practice. Catonia is more of my teaching practice. And yes, thank you very much. Congrats on that. Yeah, I appreciate that. So that came out. And then this past Friday, I also did a podcast. Well, it's a podcast I actually did. I was thinking about the date now once I was listening to it finally. It was November 2022 that I actually recorded this, and it actually just came out now. But they had a lot of material backstored. So it's with 1289 Productions, and I follow them, and I followed them for quite a long time. I'm actually on their Patreon. They do podcast 1289. They have 1289 Productions does movies. They had something called Homecoming Part 1, and I think there's a Part 2 as well. And a lot of that has to do with the members of them, like going back to their different places and doing respective like paranormal investigations and things. And at least one or two of the members of Podcast 1289 are from New Jersey, where I'm from. And so there was some sort of the homecoming of some very famous places in New Jersey where they went and they would do investigations and things. They also have a Mothman movie coming out. Like it's a Mothman tapes. I think it's like a found footage Mothman movie that they have done. And the people I know who are working on this are really quite talented. It is indie, but they are also very talented individuals. Yes, it is cool. Yeah, and it was, and they have the podcast 1289. That's a little bit sillier. I mean, they do talk about the paranormal and stuff, but it's more kind of take a piss take on it. It's more to make fun of it. They also have True Crime Movie Club, which I follow, which is where they will watch really bad true crime inspired movies and basically rate them on how rubbish they are. And yes, and the Mothman story is quite interesting. And in fact, this podcast that we just did called Unknown Horizons, and I think he called it a Daughter's Discovery is the name of the episode. They had talked about that because the Mothman, he does talk about the Mothman at the end with regard to some other things that we're discussing. But the hosts are Jesse and Michael, and Jesse Pollock is somebody I've known, virtually. We've never really met in person, but I've known him virtually because he is an author who writes for Weird New Jersey magazine. In fact, he worked with Mark Moran of Weird New Jersey to put out his first book, Death in the Devil's Teeth, which is about the Jeanette De Palma murders. And his second book was The Acid King, which came out through Simon & Schuster. And he's got a third one coming out about the Sid Vicious, Nancy Spungen murders. So he did a lot with true crime. And he's very, very good with that, but he's also interested in the paranormal. So, and Jesse was the one who helped me, actually, one of the people I credit with helping me get Catonia podcast set up, because he was the first one to advise me on equipment and, just certain aspects of things that when you're a new podcaster, my early podcasts, as people know, content-wise, they're fine. In terms of technical editing, they're pretty crap because you can hear a lot of swallowing and breathing and things on there that really should be edited out in the final version. And this went on for quite a long time because I had recorded a pre 6 months worth of episodes and then just kind of put them out. And people are going, oh my God, this is on here and that's on here. And I still get comments on it to this day. But at this point, I may actually redo some of the episodes at some point, but I can't redo all of them. So anyway, Jesse was the one who had kind of gotten me, on the shtick of what equipment to use and how to get started. And so that was always very much appreciated that. So I do get invited to do stuff with them now and again. I have been on their things. I've done, little bits on some of their, Christmas specials and things like that, where they'll bring different podcasters in to do different bits. So, so anyway, Unknown Horizons, I actually finally got to listen to it today, and it's actually quite a good episode. So, if you follow that, they're on Spreaker, Spreaker.com, Spreaker, which is actually where Katonia Podcast is also hosted. So, it's a great episode. And I think I do have the link posted in one of my last IG posts. So, so that's there as well. Okay, so enough about me and Katonia. The episode on Julian of Norwich will be coming out next week. That'll be the last in the Female Christian Mystics series. And then after that, I'm going to be moving on to other topics. And so now we're going to move on to today's topic for this. So I'm talking a bit about the toxic masculine and the toxic feminine. So, I have, and for people who wonder about how I do these podcasts, I do have like a few notes here, but they're not, I don't read from notes. So this is going to be, it's a bit spontaneous, but I wake up every morning with ideas about how I want to do things, and then we just go with it. So today's topic in terms of the toxic masculine and feminine, this did come up in a previous live stream. I think it's the one I did that was a little bit more personal about, after my uncle had passed away. It was a former friend of mine. Well, not former, she's still a friend, but she's just somebody I haven't talked to in a while. Nadine, she had mentioned she asked me, she says, could you do something on the way in which women negatively interact with each other, in addition to some of the things that I was talking about there. And and there's just been a number of things that have come up. Like I said, I'm mentioning that State of the Union response, and I've also mentioned some of these other things that have come up recently. And so I thought, this would be a good topic to address, because my argument is that what we talk about as toxic feminine and toxic masculine are actually identical. Because they come from the same script, and I'm going to explain why that is. So let me back up and do a little framing on this first, because I always think the context is somewhat important to talking about a particular thing. So the first thing I thought of with this had to do with Mircea Eliade, who was a historian of religion, who wrote many different works on the history of religion, psychoanalysis and things like that. And one of the things I remember him saying, now I can't remember exactly which book it is. I wanted to say it was Rites and Symbols of Initiation, but it might have been on a different one. Oh, yeah, you were mentioning there's a lot of human trafficking going on at the moment worldwide, interested in this subject. Yes, we will definitely talk about the human trafficking thing. I don't, or at least the way that this topic is used politically. Will be part of what I'm talking about here. So that's the context in which I'll mention that. So Eliade was talking about how, one of the things that he has said is that myths today exist chiefly in the form of distractions. Okay, so that means that we are seeing it in things that are not, maybe ostensibly outside our day-to-day life or meant to be an escape from day-to-day life, like TV shows, fiction works, things like that, movies, art, maybe even not so much art at this point, but things that are meant to entertain us. Okay, those would be what we would call a distraction. So our distractions are, thank you, Sophie, looking good, thank you very much. Yes, and you're mentioning AI as well. Yes, there's certainly a whole connection with that as well. But I think what we're looking at is what's real and what's imaginary is where we want to start, because that's a line that's been very, very difficult ever since the advent of what we would call reality TV. And really the very first reality TV show that I can remember in my lifetime was Real World, which was on MTV back in the early 1990s. And initially it was just this idea of, you have a show where you're sort of following the lives of real people in a certain context. And we have all kinds of other shows that, throwing people together in a house to do a specific thing has been a concept, or, the idea of, cribs, let's go look at my house, or things like, God, I remember Jersey Shore, which was an absolute horror, especially as somebody who lived in New Jersey, recognizing that all these people who are not from New Jersey are going down the Jersey Shore, and everybody thinks that this is what New Jersey is. So I remember being down at Seaside Heights, which is down... by the way, I'm from New Jersey. We say that when we talk about going to the beach, we talk about going down the shore, okay? So we're not... So that's a phrase, that is a very highly New Jersey phrase that I will never probably get over saying. I mean, if I'm living somewhere else, then maybe I won't say that, but when I'm in New Jersey, you go to the Jersey Shore, you go down the shore. And that means that you're up north and you're traveling south, so you're going down the shore. Yeah, that's a thing. And so I remember going down the shore one year, and they were actually filming episodes of that, and I just thought, FML, just get me out of here. I don't want to be around here, any part of this, because that's not really the New Jersey that I know. But in any case, reality TV is definitely a factor in the narrative that we have now. And I think the fact that somebody like Donald Trump would end up becoming president definitely figures into that, because certainly once he has done things in entertainment. I know he had a bit part in Home Alone. He was the host of The Apprentice at one time. And there's this whole thing about him, like this whole branding of him as the Donald, right? Like he was this rich, successful businessman who could, make all of these things happen, and that's a narrative, that's a fiction, that's a story, right? Now, one thing that's worth noting about fiction versus reality, when you think about fiction writing, particularly in the United States versus, say, someplace like the UK, okay? I remember reading an article about this once. And one of the things they were talking about was the way in which, in the UK, you could invent a completely fictional world, and it could be something that would become popular. I think Harry Potter would probably have been a big example of that. Now, I have never read Harry Potter, which might shock you, but it's not a world building that is of any interest to me. And I tend to prefer, maybe because I'm American, I tend to prefer world building that says... I prefer a world building that gives me a context that I can relate to. It doesn't have to be my life, and it's but I like to have things like, I like the works of John Bellairs. He writes around 1940s to early 1950s America, and his main character is Louis Barneveld. And by the way, if you've ever seen the House, the Clock, and the Walls movie, that's BS. That's like Harry Potterizing, if that's a word, the Bellairs universe, and it's completely wrong. Okay. So, but it's often been said that in the UK that there's definitely more of a propensity to world build in ways that are not realistic, whereas in the United States there seems to be this real thing of, well, if I can't follow this fictional narrative and find something reality based in it, then somehow it's wrong, okay? Or it's not good fiction, or it's not going to, we're going to throw the book aside and say, oh, it's rubbish. But I find that interesting, because it's not so much that we in our real worlds are looking for a window into another reality, which is, I think, my interest in seeing something where I see characters that are very relatable and very real, moving in these spaces that maybe other people think are not real, as opposed to, building a world where, everything is very fictionalized. Now, maybe you could say that about Harry Potter, because I guess initially he starts out as a regular kid, who has parents who are crap and everything, and then he ends up finding a door into this other world. So maybe that's part of it too. It's just still not anything that's appealed to me. But somebody here says Trump is like King Midas. That's interesting comparison. I think he is and he isn't in some ways. I think in terms of the person who, wants everything he touches to turn to gold, at least King Midas was smart enough to recognize that this was actually a mistake. And King Midas is also the person who, in the story of Apollo and Marsyas, he is the only one who believes the music, the natural music of the forest is the beautiful music, for which he ends up getting ass's ears. There's two different stories of how he ends up with ass's ears. So yeah, I definitely get it in the sense of somebody who just thinks that certainly there's an aspect of Trump that wants to turn everything into money, especially money for him. So that aspect of it, I can definitely, yes, that aspect of it, yes, I definitely agree with you. And it's, without learning the lesson, yes, exactly. He's not, I would not suggest that he's learned anything, but I think he's also victim of another narrative that says that he is not allowed to fail. And that's, there's so much there to unpack psychologically, my God. So when we're talking about real versus imagined, we're dealing in a zeitgeist or in an environmental arena where people don't, the line between fact and fiction is not always that clear. Now, I don't necessarily think all of that is bad, because I feel like we are living in you are living in a paradigm that has been split. There is science and there are facts, and then there's everything else. And if something falls outside of the paradigm of what we can evaluate through scientific method, we automatically discount it. And anybody who suggests that anything that might be remotely outside of that paradigm I don't know, maybe it's something we need to think about, especially if they're working in academia or in the sciences. It's like that person is just, their career is over. It's like, just, get out. You're just, you're prone to flights of fancy, right? I just think that's a huge mistake. And I also sometimes feel like maybe the paradigm we're in comes out of this rigid split, where people maybe who have had maybe strong spiritual or religious beliefs, and then if you just throw in a bit of fear into that mix, that they then feel that they cannot, you throw a bit of fear in, and there's all of a sudden you have this situation where you're very stubbornly clinging to beliefs that are conspiracy theories, and really just outlandish ones that don't have any, again, if we're talking about things that are supposed to be happening in this world, they literally have no basis at all. And I'm not even sure from a metaphysical or esoteric or spiritual basis that they necessarily have anything as well. There's this tussle, and somebody mentioned Hod versus Netzah, the Kabbalistic, the 2 points of feelings versus intellect. And that's certainly part of it. That's certainly what I call the masculine and feminine divide. But one of the things, but again, we have gotten to a point. I want to read something from Rich Eliot, actually. I mentioned him initially, and I just want to talk about this, about what our modern paradigm is like, okay? And this is what he had said in Rites and Symbols of Initiation. I had taken a little bit from it. If a modern man, and he says this in quotes, does indeed exist, it is insofar as he or she refuses to recognize himself in terms familiar to the Christian view of man or humans, or as European scholars express it, in terms of Christian, quote-unquote, anthropology. Modern man's originality, his newness in comparison with traditional societies, lies precisely in his determination to regard himself as a purely historical being, in his wish to live in a basically desacralized cosmos. So in other words, what Eliot is saying here, and he's using, of course, all masculine-facing terminology, but the idea is that you are living in a universe where you are a product of history, and you are a product of time. And if you are in history, you are in a product of time, because you are living on this idea of where you are in the present versus the past versus the future. You're thinking of yourself on this continuum, this illusion of the arrow of time, which is an illusion. And physicists will tell you that is an illusion. but it is the way in which we perceive things in the world in which we live. So the idea is that modern humans are a product of what we think are a product of history. So when we think of something as happening in the past, if somebody introduces a mythical event into that, we say, that's just mythical, that's just fiction. That doesn't have anything to do with the facts of things. We make a strong separation between the two, whereas in ancient societies, you would not have that kind of separation. In fact, now he's calling it primitive society, but I would argue it's not primitive. It's just that societies which have more archaic values that are not modern, okay? He says we'll say archaic society, I'm going to change the word here, possesses a consistent body of mythical traditions, let me say that, a conception of the world, and it is this conception that is gradually revealed to the novice in the course of his initiation. What is involved is not simply instruction in the modern sense of the world. So this is not just you going to school and learning all the facts of things. In order to become worthy of the sacred teaching, the novice must first be prepared spiritually, for what he learns concerning the world and human life does not constitute knowledge in the modern sense of the term, objective and compartmentalized information, subject to indefinite correction and addition. Right. So what we think of as science, which is something that is always evolving as we experiment and re-experiment and learn new things and get new information, he's saying, no, the spiritual knowledge is something that's far ancient, that has to do with origins, and it's something outside of that. It's something outside of the intellect. Okay? And some people like to write that off of, that's supernatural, so therefore it's not reliable, it's not real. But again, we live in a desacralized universe that says that the sacred is something that's a matter of belief. And a lot of people think belief is something that is primitive and archaic. So you have this archaic way of looking at things, and right now we see ourselves as product of history. When we think about history, and I've talked about this before, so I don't want to rehash all of this, but mythos versus historia. Mythos having to be, something that is sung or spoken out loud. This is usually the epic traditions that you would have of a society, of particularly monumental events. A good example being the Iliad being about the Trojan War, which some people say was the first war, right? But in any case, it's this great war. And the way that it's spoken of, in which the gods are involved in everything that is going on. And now we would just say, these are people who had this fiction that all these gods were involved in everything. Because we're trying to separate what is factual from what is fiction. But the gods may be involved in ways that maybe either we think of as metaphorical or perhaps experiential, in a way that we don't relate to now because we intellectualize everything. Okay. And, but as human beings, you cannot get away from the idea of story, of mythos. You can't get away from it. Even the word historia, it has a little bit of a different inflection, because historia initially in Greek has to do with something that's told to you by somebody else, and you're learning this story or this information from someone that you believe is credible. Okay. Mythos is again, that's the singing of the bards. That's the narrative, and those tend to be sacred stories, and they tend to be sung at certain times when you have guests in the hall and you sing the story of your people. Singing the song of your people. We apply that to cats nowadays and in the middle of the night, but that's the thing. It's the idea that you are telling a narrative that has to do with what connects you to nature, to the world, to your ancestors, to what's ancient. What we think of as history now is sort of this dry journalistic rendering of facts. I have observed the facts in a very scientific manner. This is what was seen, this is what's observed, so this is what is real. Okay? Now you have to realize that the human psyche isn't built to think that way. So we have... And ignoring that fact is a huge part of the problem that I think we have now. And this is why you have people who are prone to believe things out of fear that are completely, bonkers, that don't have any basis in anything really, except it's a projection of their fear. And but there's also an attempt to uphold certain narratives, certain archetypal narratives. There's certain certain archetypal things that go on. And those archetypes are ideas that overshadow us, and that when they come into our consciousness, they kind of take over everything, and our rationality ends up going out the window in connection with them. So there's a lot of archetypal stuff going on. I'm seeing a question here. Are you married? Yeah, this ring is on my right hand. No, I'm not married. This ring represents something else. I was married for 7 years. I haven't been married in a long time. So yeah, that's just to answer your question there on that. So I often talk about it in terms of the drama of the anima and the animus. So this is the drama of the soul. So for men, this would be the anima drama. Drama you would be encountering. Again, according to traditional Jungian terms, I've had a lot of discussions even recently with students about, say, females who encounter the anima, especially if they're lesbians or if they're people who are gender fluid, who maybe are interested in both parties. You see these things too, and so they'll say, well, where do I fit into this paradigm? And I'll say, well, basically whatever you're drawn to. If you're drawn to a feminine image, then you're anima driven. If you are drawn to a male image, then you're animus driven. And if someone's gender fluid, then maybe I feel like maybe we really have a mixture of both. Jung always tended to see it as your biology was one thing and your soul was another thing. And that may or may not be correct. But also I feel like gender fluidity may be part of an attempt to kind of get away from these kinds of narratives that are very, very strict, like this is what women do, this is what men do. And that is part of what I want to talk about today, too, in terms of this toxic feminine, toxic masculine thing. So let's back up a minute and let's talk about what we mean. Let's look at the mythology here. Because in the mythology of the masculine and feminine, we tend to look at things. Let's see how I have it phrased here. We tend to use the feminine in modern culture to uphold a particular agenda that I see as patriarchal. Okay. Now I don't want to fall too much into the Mary Daly, Carol Christ school of things. Not that I don't respect both of those women as feminist authors, certainly, but I feel like sometimes we can move into there becomes this idea of radical feminism as being sort of reverse patriarchy on steroids or something. That to be a radical feminist means you hate all men and you want to put men down and you want to control them and put them in their place. And I said that's not an antidote to this. Just like I've often not said that. I think this is also why you have the argument of women always doing what men do. Now, women, bottom line is that people of either sex should be able to do whatever the heck they want, according to whatever their strengths or limitations are, which is very individual. Okay, so everybody's going to be different. But there's a radical feminism in the sense of that where people might say, women. Getting women away completely from the role that we see of women as mothers or nurturers or whatever. And to me, that's a role that's chosen. If that's something you feel called to, then that's what, then do it. And if you have a difficult time doing that, then there's technology now to help people do that. Well, that also gets down to part of the discussion. Those of you who don't live in the USA might not know that in the state of Alabama, where this woman, Katie Britt, is from, they recently made a ruling that zygotes or embryos, so frozen embryos that one has for IVF, are now people. And I think I liked Michael Costa's thing is, those things are about 1/10 of a millimeter, and if it can slide through a colander, then it's not a person. I can't take it to the park. I can't. It's not really a child, but according to them, it's a child for reasons that are entirely biblical. And kind of getting back to Murch Eliad's point, he was saying, we're not necessarily existing in a Christian paradigm today. Because a Christian paradigm would imply, even if it's just a token or surface or symbolic thing, some kind of a level of spirituality. And for some people, maybe there is a deeper spirituality in that. Although it's kind of a group or global spirituality, that's all kind of been taken away. And that's kind of been out of it. Yeah. So, okay. So I wanted to talk about two specific myths, and then I want to frame it in terms of this toxic femininity. So let's start with the goddess Eris. Okay. Now, those of you who have, there's this wonderful book, and I'm lucky enough to have a copy of it called the Principia Discordia, which is the subtext, the subtitle of it in really tiny print is How I Found the Goddess and What I Did to Her Once I Found Her. This was something written in the late 60s. Now, the author is listed as somebody called Malcalypse the Younger, and or Mal 2, as he is sometimes calls himself. And the introduction to this particular one was written by Robert Anton Wilson. And if you've never read anything by Robert Anton Wilson, who wrote the Illuminati trilogy, there's lots of wonderful talks with him. You can find them on YouTube, a lot of them. But Robert Anton Wilson, or Raw, as some people call him, R-A-W, he was great. He was an absolutely brilliant thinker in a lot of ways. And so he certainly does seem to bear some connection or responsibility to this work. In any case, Orisianism, it's either a religion disguised as a joke or a joke disguised as a religion. And being it's the goddess of chaos, it is every bit as chaotic as you might think it is. I remember I was reading through their initiation ritual, and it says, well, do you regard yourself as a human being and, I don't know, not a cabbage or something else? And the person says yes, and they say, well, that's unfortunate. Do you think you can become enlightened? And they say yes, well, that's really funny. And then they kind of go on this whole thing, and they say, do you dedicate yourself to Eris? And the person goes, probably. So they kind of turn it into this very, very funny thing. But Eris, I do talk about Eris in my book, Death and the Maiden, as one of the goddesses in chapter 2, I think. I mentioned some of these feminine influences that are connected. And the main narrative that we have of Eris is the Judgment of Paris. Okay, this is where we see her in Greek mythology. Now, Hesiod does talk about Eris in his Theogony, and he connects her to all of these kinds of these horrors and misfortunes. I happen to love the definition that's in here. And let me explain here. This is what we know about Eris according to the Principia Discordia. It says, the Romans left a likeness of her. Now, she's known as Discordia in Roman, okay? In Latin. Eris is known as Discordia. She was shown as a grotesque woman with pale and ghastly look, her eyes of fire, her garment ripped and torn, and as concealing a dagger in her bosom. Actually, most women look pale and ghastly when concealing a chilly dagger in their bosoms. Her genealogy is from the Greeks and is utterly confused. Either she was the twin of Ares, the god of war, and the daughter of Zeus and Hera, or she was the daughter of Nyx, goddess of night, who was either the daughter or wife of Chaos, or both, and Nyx's brother Erebus, and whose brothers and sisters include death, doom, mockery, misery, and friendship. This is all according to Hesiod. And that she beget forgetfulness, quarrels, lies, and a bunch of gods and goddesses like that. One day, Mal 2, author of this, consulted his pineal gland, so he did his little psychic thing, and asked Eris if she really created all those terrible things. She told him that she had always liked the old Greeks, but they cannot be trusted with historical matters. They were, she added, victims of indigestion, Suffice to say that Eris is not hateful or malicious, but she is mischievous and does get a little bitchy at times. So, yes. Yes, you were mentioning Greyface. Yeah, the Curse of Greyface. And how to thwart the Curse of Greyface by, what was it, standing, I forget what it was, so-and-so, some person standing fisticuffs and standing on one legs and jumping up and down and gobbling like a turkey. Yeah, that will thwart the Curse of Greyface. So the idea here of this kind of lack of seriousness here. But the traditional story in Greek myth that predates the Iliad, and that this idea of the Trojan War that comes to be, is because there is a wedding feast that takes place, and this is between this is the wedding feast of Thetis and Peleus, who are the parents of Achilles, the hero Achilles. Okay, and Eris is not invited because, typically speaking, when you're having a wedding, you're not necessarily looking for any discord to be there. But she was quite offended by this lack of invitation. So what she does is she takes a golden apple and she inscribes the word Callisti on it, which means to the fairest. And she chucks it into the proceedings. And 3 goddesses notice it. There's Athena, there's Hera, and there's Aphrodite. Okay, so Athena is a goddess of wisdom. She's a strategic war goddess, but she's also connected with domestic things. She's a virgin goddess primarily, but she's primarily associated with victory in war. And of course, democracy is also attributed to Athena. But anyway. And then you have Hera, who is the queen of the gods, the wife of Zeus, and Zeus is the king of the gods. So she's the queen of the gods, and it's sort of a patroness of, civilized marriage and, these kind of, civilized proper social, conventions and relationships. And then you have Aphrodite, who's the goddess of love. And so all three of them, they all fight over this apple. And then Zeus comes along and says, no, we need an arbitrator as to who's going to say who's the fairest and who should get this apple. And so the unfortunate person chosen from this is Paris, who is a prince of Troy, but who is also known as Alexandros in some versions. And he is chosen to choose between the three. So, of course, how do you make a choice? Well, all three of them bribe him. Okay? So Athena says, if you choose me, I will make you a great warrior. Hera says, if you choose me, I will make you a great king. You will rule over many cities. And Aphrodite says, if you choose me, I'll give you the most beautiful woman in the world to be your wife. And Paris, being Paris, says, ooh, that sounds good. So, of course, he gives the apple to Aphrodite, which immediately turns Athena and Hera not only against him, but against the Trojans. So we have some pretext here for why they take the sides that they do. There's other reasons why they don't side with the Trojans in the war, but there's certainly one pretext there. And, of course, the most beautiful woman in the world is a woman named Helen, who is the spouse of Menelaus of Sparta. They often refer to her as Helen of Troy, but she's Helen of Sparta. She was originally, I think, the child of Zeus and Leda. So she has a divine parentage. And she's so beautiful, and she ends up being married to Menelaus. But once that choice is made, all of her other suitors say, okay, well, if anybody tries to take Helen from Menelaus, we're all going to support him to get her back. Thus, this is why the Trojan War happens, because Paris takes her away. He's taken in his hospitality, and then he violates hospitality, which is boo-boo number one. Then he takes her away. And it will never quite, it's really unclear as to whether Helen went willingly or unwillingly. There's kind of a subtext here where it's really hard to say exactly what's going on there. Certainly if you read the Iliad, there's the sense that she's certainly at that point not happy about being there, and about all this going on at her behest. So we have this judgment of Paris thing that goes on. Okay, so why do I bring that up in terms of the feminine subtext? Well, when you have Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, you have three aspects of the feminine here. You have Athena, who is sort of this virgin feminine, who is a little bit more, I want to say a little bit more masculinized, although I have often argued that war is a very feminine thing, in spite of, as opposed to being a very masculine thing. But she's definitely this more, she's more about strategy and circumspection and thinking and negotiation and things like that. Hera represents that aspect of civilized marriage that is somewhat contradictory, because it's the idea of faithfulness and obedience to one's spouse, but she also retains this real intense kind of bitterness towards her spouse as well. But she's dutiful, although hardly. She submits to her spouse, but sort of. Okay. And then you have Aphrodite, who is a goddess of love, so she represents the aspect of femininity that has to do with desire. Okay, and the way in which the anima works, which is typically if we just go with straight hetero relationships here, a man sees a woman, falls in love with the woman. Generally, that is what's considered to be, in Jungian terms, a projection of the anima or the soul archetype onto the woman, and therein the struggle begins. Because then there becomes this whole thing about trying to appeal to that woman or win that woman over. But then in connection with that, we have the myth of Circe. Okay, now Circe is the way it's typically said. In Greek it's Kirke, Kirke. We tend to think of it as Circe, and we only say Circe. But I always think of her as Kirke, and she is the sorceress who lives on her island, And when Odysseus is coming back from the Trojan War and he's making his stops at these different islands, he and his men get off at Circe's island, and when the men come to her, she invites them in, but then she turns them into pigs and puts them in cages. Okay, the symbolism of pigs is extensive. Certainly, within Judaism, we see pigs as being like the vehicle for the demonic, so to speak, because Jesus driving legions of demons into pigs. The fact that pigs are considered unclean in Judaic thinking, but this would not have been the Greeks' thinking. Nonetheless, the pig was certainly the animal that was or the piglet specifically, was the sacrificial animal of choice for those who were initiates into the Orphic mysteries. So they were, they definitely have this sort of chthonic underworld connection to the pig. Okay. So so Circe has the chance. She enchants and captures these men in the form of pigs. Okay, and then Odysseus comes along with his special moly herb that's been given to him by Hermes or Hermaeus to ward off her spells. And once he's able to ward off her spells, then they start working together in partnership. Then she becomes the lover, and then she becomes his helper. Similarly, women dealing with the animus, Jung has actually said, if a woman can be, make it through the struggles of the animus and all of the deceptions there, then the animus becomes an internal helpmate, just as the anima does. The soul should be your internal helpmate and not something you expect somebody else to live up to. Okay? So we have these different stories about the masculine and the feminine here. So let me go. Wow, time has really flown. It's already almost 4:00, but I will try to move into this. But okay, so I'm gonna move over. Those of you who have not seen it, and if you haven't seen it, I'm not sure I even want to tell you to see it because it's so awful and so embarrassing. But I was talking about the Katie Britt response to President Biden's State of the Union address. So if you go onto YouTube, if you haven't seen it, and look up Katie Britt, Katie, and then her last name is Britt, and usually if you do SOUT, SOUT response, or you can write out State of the Union, whichever. If you read her response, there's several channels that have posted her full 17-minute response to President Biden. Now, there's been various responses from people over the years, and when there's been different Democratic presidents. I mean, I've not always been democratically inclined, but for the most part, I've tended to vote Democrat just because it's more in line with what my values and my narrative is. But she got on here, and there was a few things that were said right up front, and as soon as I heard this, I thought, oh, this is interesting because this has to do with the narrative of femininity that is being pushed in this country. And it is, in fact, a very, very toxic one. And I will relate it back a little bit to some of the ideas that we were looking at in that, Judgment of Paris and that kind of a thing. But first of all, the one thing that people noticed about this speech, the content aside, which was fallacious, I mean, pretty much everything talked about in this speech that had to do with Biden or Biden's policy was just a flat-out falsehood. The idea that Biden is somehow... She was trying to make Joe Biden responsible for an incident at the border where there was a woman who was sexually assaulted by a group of people. I can't use the term because, the actual term now, because you get censored for using that term. But it's the R word. And talking about how this woman and what happened to her. And it's funny because she's doing this sitting in what's supposed to be her kitchen, and I don't know if it really is, but she's sitting there, looking all angelic and talking in this breathy tone of voice that literally, okay, this is just my own personal perspective. When I hear somebody talking like this, I either want to grab them by the neck and shake them or punch them in the face. I'm like, stop it. Just stop it. Because it's not that you're being feminine. I mean, there are women who have very high-pitched kind of voices, and that may just be their natural voice. And, that's fine. That's just their voice. That's your voice is what your voice is, right? But this is a highly inauthentic voice. And it's a voice that's trying to create a very false sense of drama. And in fact, several podcast commenters on this that I had watched were talking about the word that was used for it was uncanny. Someone's saying she's a sweet Southern belle. Yeah, I guess. But although what they had said, what I thought was interesting was that she was like, they likened it to, if you remember that reality TV show about the Duggars, the people with 20 children. And they showed, I forget what her name is, but it was basically the wife in that family. And the way that she talks kind of like this. This is the parlance, the voice of the good, submissive, evangelical Christian woman. Okay? That's what this is. This is the good, and of course she's from Alabama, which, yes, that's the deep South. Although I have met Southern women who are very much not like that. They're very kind of in your face, and they don't necessarily mince words. Okay, so I've seen both types, but she sat there, and the thing is, when she did a promo for this State of the Union, where she went on, I don't know where it was, TikTok, she went on somewhere, and she was like, hey, I'm going to be doing the State of the Union response. And, she sounded like a normal human being. In her response, she didn't sound like a human being. That was not the voice of a human being. That was the voice of I don't know what. And that's what people commented on. It was, the word used was creepy. It was so uncanny. And you were saying, her acting was forced. If you watch, she speaks so much differently. Yeah, she does speak differently. Absolutely. But the act that she's putting on is the way in which she's projecting the image of the feminine that at least the Republican Party, it seems to be telling us, if this was their messaging, that this is what their image is of femininity. It's the woman in the kitchen, and she kind of moves. Scarlett Johansson actually did a piss take on her on Saturday Night Live, and I was laughing because that's what she does. She goes, hi, now I'm going to move into an inexplicably seductive voice. Like, she kept moving between these different images. So you have the seductive aspect of the feminine, where she talk in this kind of seductive voice. And then there'd be other times where she was talking kind of like this. And it was just, and I was just like, oh my God, this is like every toxic feminine stereotype in one speech. And then she decides she's going to get very aggressive towards President Biden. Shame on you for, we had a very secure border, which is also an outright lie. You did not have a very secure border. Trump's border wall was not in any element of security. And people who are coming to seek asylum are not doing anything illegal. So to treat those people like they're criminals, to put children in cages and so forth, that's not securing the border. And in fact, what's interesting is she just recently worked with other conservative, I think it was Representative Langford from Oklahoma, to come up with a very conservative border bill that the Democrats were willing to go along with, because they were like, you know what? Yeah, border's bad for it. We're not good at dealing with border stuff. If that's what you want to do, let's work together on this. And she's one of the people who helped co-wrote the bill. And then she turns around and won't vote for it. Why? Because Trump told her not to. And I think it's very interesting when she had made this whole statement about Biden, and she had said, well, he hasn't gone to a grocery store or pushed a vacuum or done, and I'm like, well, neither has Donald Trump. Definitely not. It was just a weird, it was very inauthentic. And that's the thing, that's the problem that I have with it. It's just that, yes, I understand she's acting, but it was, even other Republicans were cringing at it openly. They were just like, oh my God, this was a disaster. And perhaps she was coached to that, but I'm like, why are you coaching to that kind of an image? Because it creates this image of, this, it almost goes back to this, to me there was something almost 19th century about it in a way. Or maybe even earlier. I mean, it's kind of going back to this image of the woman who is, she's sort of like the, I have to think about my children. And then they use female issues, okay? The sex trafficking thing was brought up, and I thought in a really tasteless way. Because first of all, it was an incident that happened under the Bush administration, had nothing to do with Biden. And it's bringing the drug cartels in, and it's bringing back Donald Trump's narrative of Mexicans as rapists and criminals, okay? And I just used the R word. But that was the narrative. And she's basically reiterating it here. Very disingenuously, as she is somebody who has tried to work on a bill to try to secure the border and then disavowed it, for political reasons. and then tries to turn around and talks about Joe Biden like he's a monster for the border being what it is. It literally makes no sense from a factual standpoint. But she's playing into a certain fear narrative. And one of the things that we've seen from that side, we've seen two sides of femininity. We've seen this kind of, I'm just a regular mom. And the thing is, this woman is also a very accomplished woman. She was the head of the Alabama Chamber of Commerce. She's a lawyer. I mean, she's a senator. She's not some, she's not somebody out of one of those commercials where they ask you about, how you want your floor wax to be. I mean, she's not that type, but that's the way they're trying to portray her. And I'm like, why are we going back to this kind of portrayal of women? The woman who's in the kitchen and her main focus is her kids, which again, if you're a mom and you're focused on your kids, that's great. But it goes back to this narrative that suggests that women are just the sum total of their biology or their parts. You have a uterus, therefore you're a mom. And it's not really going to fly in a secular society that has kind of divorced itself from that idea. And the idea that you are somehow going to revert back to that narrative is it's certainly short-sighted. And I feel like but to me, the idea of bringing in the idea of a woman who is sexually assaulted, okay, which is a horrible thing no matter what, but to try to use that as a kind of political thing and using it in a way that's very disingenuous, to me, that's like ridiculously offensive. It was like when Nancy Mace, who's another she was representative, she was asked, she had actually was sexually assaulted, and she was asked, well, how can you support a guy for president who's just been criminally charged with, or he's charged with that in court. I guess it was a civil case, not a criminal case. Nonetheless, he met the legal definition of that term. And she basically turned it around on George Stephanopoulos and said, how dare you make this about my tragedy? But she does it in such a way that's like and that's the part that I have a problem with, because it's very disingenuous. Maybe it's meant to be acted, maybe in certain types of drama that kind of works, but it's not, it's highly inauthentic. And it behaves almost like an archetype, because archetypes are not the way real people behave. They're an exaggeration. If you read a lot of the characters in my books, some of them behave in ways like in Maeve, my one character there, she's an exaggeration. But that's because she's not behaving like a real person. She's behaving like an archetype. And that's almost what we saw there. And people were actually just freaked out and creeped out by it because she's not behaving like a person who is a real human being. She's trying to say like, and then the whole thing of like, we hear you. Like she was saying this in a way that I was just like, it was hard. It was really hard for me to watch. I really had a hard time. And the only reason I watched it was for the sake of this live stream. I was like, oh my God, I can't. It's just because, again, you are dealing with a woman who, has some intelligence and even though she has political views that I'm sure I don't agree with, you're clearly talking about somebody who is not a stupid person, okay? But they're making her look that way. And it's going back to this narrative of the submissive wife who is just, it's like that Perils of Pauline thing, if you remember those, the woman who has to be rescued. It's kind of falling back into that very toxic narrative of the feminine. See, in the Republican Party, though, on the other hand, you have another type of toxic feminine, and that is the mean girl. You have the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Lauren Boeberts, the ones who want to sit there. The Speaker of the House, whom I also have no real care for, he did say the Republicans beforehand, he says, look, everybody behave and don't act out during the State of the Union. And of course, you have people like MTG who said, I'm going to do what I want. Lauren Boebert the same way. I'll do what I want. And it's very middle school. And it's that narrative of the girl who, if anybody remembers kind of the middle school experience of the way people try to socialize and kind of fit in, and you always will have the mean girls there who are the popular girls who like to sit there and be like, oh, like they like to pick on and gossip about and bully and harass girls who are kind of outside, who don't fit in, who are kind of outside the norm. Okay, I mean, they might do it to some guys too, but they have this kind of thing of walking around like they are they are the they're the established, they're going to be the animus in full swing in the negative sense. They're going to be the ones who are going to walk around judging everybody and make and say, that's somebody's saying, right, but the same can be said about girls that went into prostitution just for the intention in this day and age. Well, again, there's a whole narrative around femininity, especially at that age. I think I've done another live stream on this, and the way in which we are not given a proper understanding of sexuality. That's part of it as well. But what I'm just looking at here right now is the way in which femininity, we tend to have these two different tacks. You have this kind of bully mean girl kind of a thing going on over here. And then you have sort of the innocent virginal thing going on over here. Like, I'm just the innocent little girl, and oh my God, these things you're doing, they're so hurtful to me and my family, and and both of these are toxic because they both play into what is really a toxic masculine kind of narrative that does not know how to negotiate the feminine. And so the feminine has a particular role that it's going to play. Now, the mean girl side of it, people might think, well, that's the dark side. No, that's not the dark side. That is literally upholding, because a lot of women who get bullied into doing certain things because, people heckle them and gossip them about them and make comments about their appearance and, do certain things to try to shame them into behaving a certain way. And that way is always falling in line with some kind of patriarchal value. One common thing is they'll look at somebody who speaks their mind and they're like, oh, you're fat, you're not attractive, you're not this, you're not that. Or they'll start just saying other things that are just very viciously personal towards someone, which are just, they're these kind of attacks on people that are just meant to, and then you kind of throw off what that person's actually trying to say and trying to turn it into something that's about how well they fit into the societal definition of what it is they're supposed to be. Okay? So we see these kinds of things, but I think the Katie Britt thing that got me in particular was just, the delivery was really most of it. The talking points were things, again, I just found them to be, given what the facts are, they're fairly dishonest, but we're not moving in a paradigm where we're dealing so much in facts. That doesn't excuse it. It doesn't mean that she's right now. No, because it's just flat out dishonest. It's not just a woman who has a girly kind of voice, as we like to say. This is a woman who clearly doesn't sound like this, who is putting on this performance of being something that comes across as, I think actually you had mentioned something about AI earlier, almost like an AI version of a human being. That's the way she came across. Makes me wonder if AI actually wrote the speech. I don't know. But the way that she came across and the way that she was coached to do this comes across in a way that is just, that is highly just completely unnatural. And there's this focus on, again, everything, the economy, the worst inflation. Yeah, but we're also in the best shape of all the countries. If you look around the world, inflation is something that goes on around the world. The idea of, and playing on fear too, our communities aren't safe, our borders aren't safe. And that also gets into the narrative of the other and how we treat the other, okay? A lot of asylum seekers are people who are in desperate situations. Now, yes, in Mexico, you have the drug cartels. No question that that's a problem, and no question that their tactics are a problem, and that you don't want that coming into the U.S. Totally get that. I mean, not suggesting there's no problem at the border here. But there's also a lot of people who are trying to escape that type of violence and trying to come here, and trying to do better for people. And the thing is, and yes, I know people will say, like a lot of countries, well, we can't take everybody. I've heard that before. Okay, but there's got to be more administration in how that goes on. And that's been agreed to. And even the Democrats, who have not historically been great on that subject, have said, okay, we're not crazy about this conservative bill, but we'll go for it. And then they go, oh, no, because then Donald Trump won't have anything to run on. I mean, just very transparently, this is about a show. This is about a performance. And to me, it's just, okay, we're no longer about substance. It's all about performance. And what we're performing, and we're putting on these masks of these same old things, of these same old archetypes of femininity, these same old archetypes of masculinity, of both, really. But in this particular example that I'm giving, this is the way in which we are looking at the feminine here. I say, yeah, this is very telling about a vision of the feminine as something that is, confined to a situation of marriage, confined to, I'm at home in my kitchen raising my kids, which again, I don't want to disparage that. I mean, I'm not an anti-marriage person. There's people who are married and have kids who are very, very happy, and I'm not disparaging any of that. But a lot of people don't choose that, and they're made to feel like somehow you are not feminine, not a woman. Some people go as far as to say you're a monster for not choosing that, okay? And it's just like, no, everybody makes different choices, because it's not this unilateral stereotype of what women should be. And when people start making political choices that say, oh, well, women are only allowed to be this and that, and they can't make this decision with their body, and they can't do that, and they can't do this, and they can't do that, it all comes back to this very toxic narrative that, again, plays back into this very masculine idea. So so when you're playing back into this very, very masculine idea, it's very much there becomes this idea that, you again, the woman is not being defined on her own terms. She's being defined on some kind of social terms with her relationship to the masculine. And again, it's not you masculine and feminine are elements, but they're not necessarily going to combine in these traditional ways. There are other ways in which these elements may well come together. And I just find it rather disturbing and rather interesting, because I just feel like when people tell me, like when my students tell me, when I teach mythology and I talk about these things, and I talk about stories and narratives and things, and they go, yeah, but that doesn't have any relevance to my life. I mean, that's all ancient stuff and ancient ideas. I'm like, no, those ancient ideas connect in with what's going on now. They're talking about human behaviors. They're talking about different ideas that we have about concepts of masculinity or femininity. And they're talking about it from a perspective, certainly when we get to the Greeks or even before the Greeks, we're talking about something that's outside of history. And we're not talking about something from a historical context. Right now, to kind of circle back on Merch Eliade, we live in a historical context where we are separated from the sacred. And our only connection to the sacred that we have is what we think of as religion in the modern parlance. And modern religion, again, is something that comes out of kind of a rational ethical construct. Monotheism is a rational ethical construct. A lot of its beliefs and laws and dogmas and doctrines really come out of philosophy and ideas about the spirit and transcendence and things like that. But we're really getting very, very far away from what the authentic feminine was, the core feminine, the dark feminine, that underworld push that we have, that connection to a feminine that is very, very authentic, to a voice that's very, very authentic, to going back to this reality show kind of things where we're playing these kinds of games and playing these kinds of roles. And at some point we have to recognize that that's what we're doing, that is what we're doing. Now, on the other hand, you can look at Alan Watts and you can look at Zen philosophy, where he'll say, well, all of life is a game. To a certain extent, we're all playing roles. We're all wearing masks. We're all playing roles. And yeah, that is true to a certain extent. But to what degree do we believe those roles and those masks are something authentic? Because a lot of times they're not. They're not the authentic person that's underneath. And ultimately, at some point in our lifetimes, we need to get to that authentic person that's underneath, okay? I did want to finish this because we're already at 4:15, and I'm usually only do an hour on these. But I'm going to go back to the Principia, okay? And this was something... It's funny because they actually refers to it as a sermon on ethics and love. I don't know if you can see it because the light is coming through my window in a very bizarre way. But it made me think about this Katie Britt speech a little bit. This is the thing that came into my mind. There's one day Malcalypse the Younger, asked the messenger spirit St. Gulick to approach the goddess and request her presence for some desperate advice. Shortly afterwards, the radio, and by the way, Messenger St. Gulick is a cockroach. Shortly afterward, the radio came on by itself, and an ethereal female voice said, "Yes." "Oh, Eris, blessed mother of man, queen of chaos, daughter of discord, concubine of confusion, oh, exquisite lazy, I beseech you to lift a heavy burden from my heart." You can hear the drama here. She says, "What bothers you, Mal? You don't sound well." He says, "I am filled with fear and tormented with terrible visions of pain. Everywhere people are hurting one another. The planet is rampant with injustices. Whole societies plunder groups of their own people. Mothers imprison sons. Children perish while brothers war. Oh, woe." She says, "Well, what is the matter of that if that's what you want to do? But nobody wants it. Everybody hates it." "Oh, well then, stop." At which point she turned herself into an aspirin commercial and left the Polyfather stranded alone with his species. Yeah. So there's this. So well then, stop. Let's get let's get away from the drama here. And I'm seeing these comments here. Let's see. Somebody asked if I have a PhD. I have a DLit, but yes, I do have a doctoral degree. And doctor is correct, yes, for referring to me. Reality shows are actually scripted. Yes, they are actually scripted. And I'm reading that because that's what it comes down to. We put a lot of drama around these things. And that can be interesting, I guess, in and of itself, but eventually at some point you have to say, okay, when are we going to recognize that this isn't authentic and that this isn't real? And when are we going to get to what is actually real? Okay. And the very practical advice there. Yeah. Okay. Oh, you don't like killing each other? Oh, okay. Well then stop. But it kind of almost raises the question there of, what do you, well, okay, there's another piece in here. Let me see if I can find it. Oh yeah, this is a good one. I'm just going to read this and then I'm going to get off this live stream for now. Let's see. Oh wait, that's not the one. Okay, this is called A Zen Story. A serious young man found the conflicts of mid-20th century America confusing. He went to many people seeking a way to resolving himself within. Seeking a way of resolving within himself the discords that troubled him, but he remained troubled. One night in a coffee house, a self-ordained Zen master said to him, "Go to the dilapidated mansion you will find at this address, which I have written down for you. Do not speak to those who live there. You must remain silent until the moon rises tomorrow night. Go to the large room on the right of the main hallway, sit in the lotus position on top of the rubble in the northeast corner, face the corner, and meditate." He did as the Zen master instructed. His meditation was frequently interrupted by worries. He worried whether or not the rest of the plumbing fixtures would fall from the second-floor bathroom to join the pipes and other trash he was sitting on. He worried how he would know when the moon rose on the next night. He worried about what the people who walked through the room said about him. His worrying and meditation were disturbed when, as if in a test of his faith, ordure, or shit, fell from the second floor onto him. At that time, two people walked into the room. The first asked the second who the man sitting there was. The second replied, "Some say he is a holy man. Others say he is a shithead." Hearing this, the man was enlightened. So, yeah. There's a whole lot here about narratives and especially these kinds of play acting and this kind of narratives about the feminine that are very highly inauthentic, or that play into archetypes in a way that are actually a bit more toxic, at least in this kind of way of thinking, and the way in which we uphold these traditions. And of course, if we go back to the Eris apple story, there's this idea of all she has to do is throw an apple in that says "to the fairest." And you watch all of these people who represent, at least kind of are the representatives of all of these different forces, the way in which they change when that becomes part of the dynamic, when you have this kind of almost animus energy that's thrown in there and that says, which among you is most beautiful. You actually see this in other mythologies as well. You see it among men too. The heroic stories of like Cuchulainn, for instance, and the other heroes who, Bricru, who is the satirist. Nobody wants to deal with the satirist because, they're all great men and they're heroes and they don't want somebody to make fun of them, right? And so they don't want him at the feast, but he leaves a choice cut of meat, and he says, to the bravest, or the best, the greatest of you. And then they have to fight and have tests over who's the greatest and most. It's the same kind of a story, only told from a different vantage point. So a lot of this has to do with our own image and our projections of ourselves and how we actually see ourselves in that context. But these images of the feminine that we try to live up to, or that we are told is the approved norm of what we want to live up to, they're very much connected to ideas of what patriarchal values tell us that we need to live up to. And that's the thing that you really need to stop and think about. And I have gotten to a point in my life where I'm no longer defend myself from those kinds of things. People say, oh, well, I can't believe you didn't have children, or you don't value this, or this isn't that. And I just say, well, no, I don't. I don't. That's not who I am. That doesn't, I just don't, I just feel inclined to say, well, this is who I am. And if these are not the things, I have no objection. Actually, I'm one of those people who has no objection to anybody else embracing whatever they want, whatever makes them happy. But if you're doing something, if you're following a particular narrative because it's what you're supposed to do, then that's a difficulty. And when we live in a society that says that we are free and that we can be who we are and what we want to be, that's problematic too, because then if we are seeing these kinds of narratives being pushed on a political level, or on the level of national legislation or policy, then we're not really talking about a freedom. You're only free to be what the narrative says that you can be. And you've got to be looking at what these narratives of femininity are that are being put forward by some of these groups, and just say, and a lot of people, I think, already kind of have a real strong pushback on those narratives. But I think the one thing to take away is that, particularly in this particular example we were talking about today, there's something uncanny about it. There's something uncanny. It's not it's not the way a human being speaks. It's not the way a real woman speaks. And that's the thing I think that I really was kind of interested in and focused on there. But at the same time, it is a voice that is promoting a rather toxic view of femininity that makes it either kind of this very weak, submissive kind of image that doesn't question the male authority, or on the other hand, maybe not in this speech, but what we see coming from that particular side is sort of this bullying, mean girl. We're just going to shout down anybody who doesn't agree with our perspective or what we're pushing. And both of those are aspects of the animus. Both of those are aspects of this very opinionated male archetype. I do have a previous live stream on that, so again, you can always go back through them and check if you want to watch that. If they're not on Instagram, I do have them on YouTube. So, okay, I have talked for way long enough today. Thank you all so much for joining me. Thank you for the interactions today. I thought they were very interesting, and it was good to have some things to talk about. Hopefully, I've hit all of the points that I wanted to hit today coherently. But anyway, that's what I have to say for this week. I will do another live stream next week, and of course, there'll be a new podcast out next week as well. Thank you all so much for watching. See you next time.